Hi, I am Dr. Anthony Edwards, and this is our video for Chapter 8, What is Leadership? Making Sense of Complexity and Contradiction. And I'm a professor of educational leadership and technology at Tarleton State University, and we're about to get started and talk a little bit about leadership. All right, so what makes a great leader is one of the first things we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk about components of leadership as well as dichotomies of leadership, things that are in opposition to each other, as well as theories of leadership. So that's what we're going to cover today. All right, so we'll start here. What makes a great leader? Well, Warren Bennis has really studied this and has come up with his framework for what makes a great leader. And these are things like being able to, create mission, figure out what the mission is going to be, motivating others, developing trust in the team, having a sense of optimism all the time. So, when things are tough, always having a positive attitude, developing your other leaders on your team, and ultimately getting results or execution. So, those are some of the things Warren Bennis thinks make a great leader. And that could be in academia or outside of higher education. So, the authors of our textbook have come up with these as some of the important components of leadership based on some of the work of others, as well as their own studies. And so, some of the different components that they find that leaders have are the ability of attraction. Other people are drawn to them. They create community. They know how to build a strong culture in their team. They are able to implement change effectively. They're able to influence others, solve problems. They can develop and articulate their vision, and they can take action on that vision, and they can build strategy around that vision in order to achieve it. So, what are some of the dichotomies of leadership? Things are in opposition to each other. So, there are several that are mentioned in the book, but there are three that the authors really focus on. And so, I'll focus there. One is the dichotomy between leadership and management. So, between leadership and management, you're going to have this dichotomy of, basically doing the work and making sure the work gets done versus figuring out if we're doing the right work. So, if you're given a task and you accomplish the task, you're essentially, with your team, you're managing. But if you're able to sort of translate that in terms of where that fits within the vision and helping achieve the vision, that becomes more leadership. The next dichotomy that we'll talk about is leadership versus followership. So here what we're talking about is what does the leader do versus what do the followers do? And I think there's some leadership theories that focus more on leaders, and there's some leadership theories that focus more on followers, and some that are a combination of both. But in terms of how we study organizations, I think there's something to be said for that dichotomy between leaders and followers. The third dichotomy that they focus on in the book deals with leadership as an art form versus leadership as a science. So, whether the person really views leadership from a lens of creativity versus whether the person looks at leadership through the lens of structures, recipes, formulas. And there's a place for both, but there is that dichotomy between, is there a formula to being a great leader versus, is there some sort of, is it just a secret sauce that's not really tangible, but it's really how creative is the leader in the situation? The approaches to leadership that are discussed in the textbook include the trait approach, skills approach, the style approach, and situational approach. So we'll focus on this slide on the first three. So traits, there's the great man theory or great person theory, and it essentially is leaders like the image says, like if you look at their fingerprint, they have a certain DNA about them. They have certain traits that make them great leaders, and some people have it and some people don't. So, if we go back to what Warren Bennett said about what leaders do and who they are, there those that ascribe to the theory that leaders just have that innate and others just don't. Whereas we contrast that with the skills approach, where it's more about what competencies can the leader develop to lead more effectively, which is a big shift. So again, skills is more focused on what are the actions that anyone could use in order to implement and become a better leader. Then you have the style approach that suggests, there are certain leadership styles. If you translate the skills, maybe certain people have a certain combination of skills that leads them to a leadership style. And there's some different leadership styles out there, but the style approach sort of suggests that, based on a certain person's skills, that they tend to fall into one of these categories of leadership styles. All right, so let's talk more about the situational approach on the next slide. So with situational leadership, as the name suggests, it's leadership adjusting to the situation, and also about the competency or level of competence of your team members and the level of motivation or independence of your team members. So again, if your team members have low competence and low motivation, you're probably going to be more directing in terms of how you lead them. If they have motivation but not much competence, you can coach them and kind of help them along. If they got the competence but they just essentially need some motivation, you can support them, right? But if they have the motivation and they have the competence, they're off the races. So you can just delegate your tasks to them and they can get it done. And so it just really depends on what they need. Sometimes as leaders, you have people who can get the job done and they need a more encouragement. They might need certain skills, maybe it's more, sometimes it's more that they need, barriers removed, and we'll talk more about that later. All right. But there are lots of different ways, that you can coach and support your team members as a leader in higher education, whether you're in academic affairs or student affairs, enrollment management, athletics, finance and administration, advancement. So there's lots of different ways you can use these skills. All right, so let's talk some about the leadership theories. So let's start with, you have contingency theory, servant leadership, path goal theory, authentic leadership, leader-member exchange theory, team leadership, transformational leadership, and communication and social influence theory. So we're going to cover each of these. And again, this is not a class where you got to memorize a whole bunch of things. You're going to be able to use them. And so I give you this to you as sort of a framework to know what some of the major theories are. And I wanted to introduce those to you as soon as possible so that you can implement them and use them and reference them throughout the course. All right, so that's kind of a hint for some of the activities that we do. All right, let's start with Fiedler's contingency theory. So similar to situational leadership, contingency theory asserts that your leadership style needs to be contingent, right, on the situation. And so what are some of the variables at play here? Well, I'm glad you asked. So first one is the structure of the task. So what's involved? Is it a highly specialized task or is it a more simple task? The level of power or authority of the leader is the second criteria. A person with more authority is going to be able to use more authority power to get things done in that situation or that organization. A person who has less authority power is going to need to use more influence. relationships between the leader as well as with the followers. That's your third criteria. So if they have strong relationships, again, you can rely on those relationships and use some influence and motivation to get things done. If you don't have a lot of relationship, you may have to be a little more authoritarian in terms of getting things done. But you may have to start investing that time in developing that relationship. All right, let's talk about path goal theory. So here, essentially, you have a goal that you're trying to achieve, and then there is a path that's going to get you there. And the leader's job is to remove barriers, right? They use, in quotation marks, clear the path, right? So you can see my quotation marks here. So in order to help team members get to the goal line, your job as a leader is to figure out, okay, do they need more budget? Do they need someone in another department to approve something? Do they need certain resources? They need in an academic setting. Okay, student affairs. Are you going to need in order to have this or event on campus? Are you going to need to have T-shirts? Are you going to need to have academic affairs come and give presentations? Are you going to so whatever those things are that your team members don't necessarily have the resources or authority to get, your job is to help get those things for them so they can do their jobs. In leader member exchange theory, this one is a little different from the others because the others focus primarily on the leader. This theory focuses really on the relationship or exchange, right, between the leader and the different members of the team. And the authors of this theory really focus on whether a person is considered in group or out group. So if they're in the group, they are going to be able to rely a lot more on certain types of leadership strategies in order to work with that team to get things done. But oftentimes in higher education, you're going to deal with people who are not in the group, who are out of the group, who maybe you don't have the same relationship with them that you have with the members in your team, and or you may have levels of your team where someone at the lower level of the team doesn't have the power of someone at the higher level. And that person's going to have to use different strategies in order to get something done than someone who is a part of the group who's quote unquote in power, who has you've got referent power, so to speak, because you are associated with someone who's in charge. And so how you lead is going to vary depending on which group you're in. So again, if you need something and it requires somebody in another division, it's going to be different than someone who's in your division, right? All right, so we have transformational leadership is the next theory we're going to talk about. And here we're contrasting transformational leadership with transactional leadership. And transactional leadership, it's like I pay you, you get the job done, no more, no less. I expect you to get it done, but the leader's not going to get anything extra out of their team. They're going to get it done on time, and it's going to meet the standard. But that's it. Transformational leaders get more from their team members than folks would expect. And how they do that is through 4 different strategies. One is what we call individualized consideration. And so that's essentially if each member of the leader's team is an individual, and how that leader works with each one of them is unique depending on that individual's skills, strengths, weaknesses, emotional structure, but he sees each of them as an individual and treats them that way, makes them feel special. Next component is intellectual stimulation. The leaders obviously intellectually stimulated by the goal that they have to do, but they also foster intellectual stimulation in the team members that they work with. So whether you're in enrollment management or academic affairs, you're really watching to see what drives people and give them projects that they find intellectually stimulating. Um, Again, idealized influence is the third factor, and in this sense, that transformational leader is charismatic. When they walk in the room, people know they're there. When they ask for something, people do it because they want to, not because they have to. And they're able to communicate in a way that's persuasive. Inspirational motivation is the fourth criteria, and again, when they are in the room with the team, they inspire them, they motivate their team members to do more, to want to be a part of the goal, to see the goal matters, that it's valuable. So that's transformational leadership in a nutshell. Servant leadership, also another important theory. This one comes from Robert Greenleaf. And simply put, servant leaders are going to think about others first. So if they see their team members and they need something, even if it costs them their own gain, they're going to put their team members first. It's focused more, and it's not purely based on just achieving the goal as much as it is a genuine concern, care for your team members outside of just achieving the goal. So it's one thing with path goal of clearing the path and getting them the resources they need. Servant leadership takes it a step further to realize, this person is really having some tough times with other things that are going on. Whether or not it improves their performance or not, I want to help this person, and figuring out how you can help them. And that motivates people, because they see the leader as caring for them. All right, authentic leadership. This comes from George, and essentially George says that authentic leaders use these different types of skills. So they're able to have purpose, act with purpose, and help others understand the purpose. They're also self-aware. They know what's going on, how they're being perceived by others. They know if they're communicating appropriately or not. They're able to read the room. Their values, so they're led by values. They're not just led by goal achievement, making more money, power, gaining a better title. What drives them is that they believe, so in higher ed, many of us believe that we want our students to be successful. And if we communicate that and work and operate and act with that as our philosophy, that is essentially you're leading and living by your values. Transparency. If you're going to be authentic with people, you have to be open with people. So if you're making decisions and not explaining to people why you made the decisions that you made, that's not being authentic. Obviously, there's a leader. There are going to be times when you or people that lead you have to make decisions, and there may be things they can't tell you right away or can't tell you at all. But when they have the opportunity to be transparent, they should, if they're going to be an authentic leader. Also, authentic leaders are very focused on relationships. They connect with other people a lot of times out of those values, out of that transparency. They make connections with people because of it. So that is authentic leadership. Okay, McGrath talks about team leadership. And again, this is not focused on the individuals achieving the results. This is looking at the team as a whole. And a lot of team leadership deals with setting common goals that each member can sort of find their place within that common goal. And identifying the challenges that the team faces and providing the necessary support and solutions that are going to help the team thrive. But again, it's really focused here on the followers, right? And so we're focusing on the team as a whole unit as opposed to a collection of individual workers. All right, so our last theory has to do with communication and social influence theory. So you might remember this from chapter 1 in terms of messages, strategy, processes, and structures. So here, in order to influence others, again, we're not relying so much on authority, we're relying on influence. We're relying on our ability to communicate through proper messaging. So, are we speaking regularly? Are we emailing? Are we providing recaps of things that have been going on in our meetings? Are you, every time you have a win, are you celebrating the win? Are you, responding, letting people know about it? Are you communicating? So again, that relies on the next piece, strategy. So, what is your strategy for achieving things? So obviously there are going to be other pieces other than just messaging, but it's got to fit into a larger strategy in order to achieve the goal. Processes, if there are specific tasks that have to be done in order to achieve the goal, knowing what those are and making sure that they're optimized. The structures, whether they're organizational structures or other structures, constituents that need to be considered. So all of these things are components of gaining influence. So again, as a leader, especially as a lower or mid-level leader, you're going to need influence. And so understanding how, whether you're in student affairs or academic affairs or admissions, wherever you are in the organization, in order to advance, you're going to need to develop influence. And even when you get to those levels, you can't lead on authority all the time. You're going to have to figure out how to help people want to do what's necessary and communicate that. All right, so let's review here. So what makes a great leader? So it's the all those things that we talked about with Bennis. So that was one of the big things we talked about. All right, the components of leadership, the dichotomies of leadership, the theories of leadership. So we covered a lot in this chapter. It is probably one of the longer chapters, and so congratulations on getting past it. But that's why I create these reviews for you, so that you can make sense of it all and then kind of summarize it and get through it quickly. Again, you'll be relying on this throughout the course, so this is an important chapter. But again, don't feel the stress to memorize. Just feel like you need to learn and understand it and be able to use it. All right, so this has been Chapter 2, What is Leadership? And Dr. Anthony Edwards, and I will see you in the next video.